Hey and welcome back. So in the previous video we did the tab bar, and in this video we're going to be working on the next thing, which is having some data. So we have the tabs, we want to have some stuff displayed in the first tab that is selected, but in order to do that we will actually need to have some data to display. And we start off where we always do, which is the source tree. And we are currently on the develop branch. So what we are going to do is we are going to first update our master branch. So let's just merge that into master. Okay, no, we're not gonna pull, we're gonna push. And it would be great if the mouse wouldn't be snapping on selections that I don't care about. Okay, and we go back to our develop, and we're going to make a branch. It is going to be a feature branch, data, so much data. All right, we go back to our Xcode. Now the big question is, where will this be? What is this? So obviously it'll be some kind of a JSON, but where will it reside and how will we get it? So in order to do that, we are going to need a service. Specifically, it will be a data service. And we will need a folder for that, so let's add it. So this will be a services folder, and let's just put it right here. And we're going to create a file which will be our data service. Okay, and here we are. So this will be a class, and it will offer some services to us, obviously. But since this will be more or less a tool, we can say that the initializer for it will be private, because we don't really want anyone to instantiate it outside, because the only thing that this little fellow will offer is a static function, and that function will get us all the data that we need. So it will be fetching all the food items, which we are going to display in the first tab. Now we don't have any food items, so we need to do that. So we need to add them, and specifically this food item will also need to be somewhere, and since it will be on the home tab, we will put it there. So we go to our home tab and we add a model folder, and we are going to be adding a food item. So we are going to be displaying a list of food items, and since these are data, it can be a structure, and it will be codable because of reasons we will come back to later on. So this is our food item, and what do we need? What would a food item offer us in order to display it? Well, if we look at the designs, we can see we are going to be having a icon, a title, and a flag, whether or not it is favorite. And since we're going to be doing more stuff with it later on, we're going to need more than that. But let's just start off by giving it an ID, which is something you will actually see quite often. And we said we're going to need a title, and at the moment we don't need a subtitle, but we do need a is favorite. Right, so it'll have an ID, it'll have a title, and its favorite. And we're going to be needing a image. So let's say this will be a string, because if you will be working on a real life app, this will most likely be a URL and the image would be loaded asynchronously, and that would basically mean you will get a string and you would need to parse it, which is exactly what we're doing here. So we're emulating that. And this is our food item. So if we go back to our fetch all food, we will be returning it. Now, this would most likely be a asynchronous service. So we are going to be pretending it is, because it is a good exercise. So we are going to be passing a completion block in order to return our data, which will be a whole bunch of food items, and this could be optional. So basically, a completion closure is called when the operation finishes and the parameter that it returns is an array containing food items containing a list of food items. So, and that's it. It doesn't return anything, so that's why it's void, and it's optional because, well, at the moment it's not even necessary. So let's just keep it that way. Okay, so obviously you are going to need some kind of data, and this can be anything you want. It doesn't necessarily need to be food, but we are making a food app, so that's the way it is. And what we're gonna do is we're going to look at one I made earlier instead of actually typing it out. So copy paste and magic happens. So this is a list of food items I made earlier, and they contain a little bit more data than we have defined. So they have, let's take a look. They have an ID, they have a web URL path, title, subtitle, and the image name, and whether or not it's favorite. Okay, so this means that we have to go back to our food item, which we will do so, and update it to match the data that we have. So the ID, the web URL path, title, subtitle, thumbnail, image name, and his favorite. So that will be our data service, or should I say that will be the data that our data service returns. And now we need to simulate a network request. So let's pretend this goes out in the interwebs and on a server, and some magic happens, and as a response we get an array of the data that we just defined, and we want to simulate a little bit of a delay. So for that we will be using a dispatch queue. It'll be global, and it could be here, and we're going to be dispatching it here, this one. It'll be dispatched right about now, but we're gonna add a 1 second delay, and what we want to dispatch is this. So this is a quality of service, so how important the work being done is, and this operation could not be on a main thread, right? So what we need to do is, since the asynchronous operation that would have been here, meaning a network request, would not have been on the main thread, we will be simulating as if it is. So when you get it back, you want to return it on the main thread, and for that we're going to need a dispatch queue again, and this time we're going to say main, we're going to say asynchronous, and we're going to be passing the completion block and returning our items. So to reiterate, non-escaping closure, which is escaping, so that is why we can say that this closure, the completion block, is escaping. So you can do that by adding the @escaping, which usually is suggested here with the fixit, but alternatively we could add a escaping, and I'm not sure, I think it is here, right? And now Xcode is happy. So that's one way to do it, and the other way is to have the closure optional. And if we go back to reiterate, so this would be on a non-main thread, and this is on a main thread. The reason being is that we will be returning data to something that usually will be displaying it, which is done on the UI. The operations for fetching it will be done on a non-main thread, and that's why we package it, so we go from one to the other. And that's it in terms of the fetch operation. Alright, so now that we have our fetch function ready, we will be needing to parse it. So we will need to make sure that we get the appropriate data from that JSON payload that we generated. And we are also going to be needing a model for the UI. So at the moment we have the data structure that is returned from the asynchronous service, which we defined in this folder, the food item, and now we need a model, or should I say, now we need to define data that will be used for the UI. So in order to ease our parsing, we will be adding a specific food. So a food item would be a description of it, and the food would actually identify the specific item. So food item would be basically data around the food, and food would be a unique item. You'll see what I mean. So this will be a enum, and its raw value will be string. So our food items will be unique, which is why we have an enum, because the cases need to be unique. And these are our foods. These are the foods we have, starting with tuna, which may not be the best choice. And in the middle we have ice cream, which is a good choice. And at the end we have a tomato. Not sure about that, but either way Xcode doesn't complain. So this will be the identifiers, the raw value, which will match the data that we defined previously. So when we get that JSON, we know when we do the parsing what we're dealing with. And another thing that will be really interesting is that every food item will have a color. So when we have a list, it'll look very fancy. So what we do is we will be defining a color, which will be a computed property. And color resides in the UI kit framework, and I think I'm gonna need the foundation as well. So we need that. Now, what does this mean? It is a computed property. It means that for every one of these cases, you can actually access this. And that means we need to first figure out which of these cases we actually are in. So we will be switching self. And after that, we need to cover all the cases that we defined here. So all of these need to be covered in here because we want to have a color for every one of them. I just added these. They seem to work pretty well. Be mindful of this initializer. So when you're making a UI color, the values here are normed from 0 to 1. So if you're having RGB values, make sure to divide them by 255. Okay, so we have our food, which will serve as a identifier when parsing these food items. And now we actually need the parsing. This will be really simple, but let's just make another folder for it. It will be our parser. And this will be a food parser. Alright, so there is no reason for this to be an object, it's more of a tool. So same thing applies, and the initializer can be private, and the service that this food parser will be offering is to get color from the ID. So color for ID will be this. So ID is a string, and what we're gonna get back is a color, and for that I need UI kit, and this color will be optional because the string can be pretty much anything, and we cannot guarantee that a color exists for this string. So And now we use the enum we created. So we use the food and we will initialize it with the ID, and we access its computed property. So we have a food, it'll be initialized with the ID. So if it's a valid ID, this will exist. If it's not, it will be nil. That's why this is optional. And after that, we access its computed property for the color, so we get it. And that's it. So we can now parse the JSON data and get a specific food object that will be used when displaying the entire list. Okay, so the reason I'm calling this a JSON data is because this would be the result of parsing a JSON file, and what it actually is a array of items which are a structure in our case. So just to clear that up. Alright, so now that we have our parser and our JSON data ready, let's check it out just to make sure everything is working. So the last time, or should I say in the last video, we did a presentation of the list view controller and we ended up here. So the did load got called. So what we can do is we can go into this function and we will be using our data service, and we will be fetching all the food we can get, and we have some fancy auto completion. This will be all the foods, and let's just print it. And yeah, so let's just run this and check it out. Alright, so as you can see, we get all our food items here, and this is not a pretty picture. So actually, let's try and do this. So we don't need the debug output. What we actually need is a breakpoint right here, and let's just rerun this. And we're gonna check out the values. Alright, so this breakpoint triggers, and eventually Xcode will decide it is a good idea to start cooperating, and it will print out and show the variables that are in the current scope, or I'll win the lottery. Alright, so this is the foods right here, and these are all of our foods, which are 32 food items. And let's just look at the first one, ID 20. It is ice cream, how appropriate for the summer. And we have our URL, our title, our subtitle, the thumbnail image, and whether or not it's favorite, which it should be favorite, because who doesn't like ice cream? So that's nice. And before we wrap this up, let's just go back to our assets. And obviously we are going to be needing an icon for every food item, which ends up to 32 icons, right? So definitely a group, a folder. So let's add that. And let's just add all of them right here. So these would be our icons, and they are named the same as we named them in the so yeah, the name of the icon needs to match the image name here, just so that the correct one would be displayed. Obviously, in a real environment, you would be having a URL. Like I said, you would be loading, you would be for every item you would be loading an image, and you wouldn't need to do any parsing, so it would be probably easier. But yeah, that's basically it. We have created a JSON structure which defines all of our data that will be displayed. We added a parser for this specific data and a service, and we have added the icons and a nice mapping from our JSON data to a data that is used on the UI to display the actual items. So before we wrap up, we can just organize this a little bit. So we have our parser, and these are our models, so let's just put them here. So how does this look at the moment? So we have our home folder, we have the controller, these would be the tabs, currently only one tab, and this is our parser. Okay, and we also added the service, which simulates the network request and gets our data. So that's it for this video. In the next video we will be taking all of this data and displaying it in a table view. So specifically we will be creating the first tab and displaying the hard work we did today. It will look pretty cool because we will start to get to the really fun stuff. UI is always fun because you get like visual feedback, and it will be scrollable because there are a lot of items. And another thing that we are going to do is that we are going to make a fancy animation and animate the way the individual items appear on the screen. So make sure you check it out and click that like button, click that subscribe in order not to miss this very cool video that will be posted next time. But for today, that's it. Stay safe, and I'll see you next time.